Hi and welcome to Comedy Recapped. Today we'll be examining 2006's The Valet. Beware, spoilers ahead, watch out and take care. The movie begins with two friends, Francois and Richard, driving two expensive-looking cars to a restaurant before handing them over to their respective owners as they continue their jobs as valets. Later that day, Francois visits his parents and he finds his sick father taking care of the doctor, who had fainted while treating him. The doctor checks himself and, after determining that he's okay, he prepares to leave. Francois's mother informs the doc's daughter Emily, and she comes over to pick up her father. As they leave, Francois's mother compliments Emily's beauty, and then asks Francois discreetly if he's got the ring. Francois replies that he'll get it before their lunch date the next day. Francois returns home to find his friend Richard, who squats with him, already in the house eating. He places a ring on the table and beams at it as Richard asks for its worth. Francois explains that he got the ring for a giveaway price of 1,300 euros, to which Richard exclaims, stating that he'd never get married. Ignoring Richard's comment, Francois reminds him that he'd have to move out if Emily agrees to his marriage proposal. Richard gets deflated at this news, stating that he hates living with his drunk mother. He then mentions that if Francois gets rejected, then he'd get to continue squatting with him. The next day, we see a man, Levasseur, and his wife Christine having breakfast together at an exquisite mansion before Levasseur kisses his wife goodbye and leaves for work. On his work, Levasseur stops at a random building and rushes in after his bodyguard mentions that the coast is clear. A couple of minutes later, a hot model named Elena, dressed in a sunshade and a scarf to hide her identity, packs close to the building and walks in briskly. Francois visits the bookstore owned by Emily and then invites her to lunch. After eating, he presents her with the ring and asks her to marry him. Smiling, Emily looks at the ring and then asks why he'd want to marry her, to which Francois replies, "I love you. Remember back in kindergarten I promised to marry you?" Emily smiles, then mentions that was kids being kids and that they've grown up now. She further explains that she doesn't want to get married, and even if she did, not to him. She mentions that she sees him like a little brother and doesn't want to hurt him. Francois is left in a heartbroken state, asking why she isn't interested in marriage, to which Emily replies that due to starting the bookstore, she is in a lot of debt. Meanwhile, back at the building, Levasseur makes out with Elena, then presents her with a diamond bracelet to mark their 2-year anniversary. Elena rejects the gift and mentions that she's tired of waiting for Levasseur to divorce his wife. She storms off after mentioning that she's done with the affair. Shocked by her outburst, Levasseur runs after her into the street and then grabs her hand while begging her to give him some time to finalize the divorce. Francois, who was returning from lunch after the rejection, passes by Levasseur and Elena on the way. At the same moment, a reporter who is passing by sees Levasseur grab onto Elena. Smelling a story, he takes a picture of them right as Francois walks by. Francois returns home and gets into an argument with Richard, after which he tells them to leave his apartment. Levasseur, on the other hand, gets queried by his wife, Christine, about the picture of him and Elena. In a fit of desperation, Levasseur mentions that he doesn't know the lady in the picture. However, Christine presses on, causing him to mention that Elena was walking by with the other guy in the picture, Francois. He feigns anger at the press and then stalks off while mentioning that he'd sue them. Levasseur relays all that has happened to his lawyer, Maitre, then comes up with a solution. He suggests that they locate the guy in the picture, then pay him to play along with the story and act like he and Elena were a thing. Levasseur meets up with Elena and proposes the idea to her. She, however, puts forth the condition that he sends her 20 million euros as a show of trust, and after he divorces his wife, she'd send it all back to him. Maitre visits Francois at his job and then proposes the idea to him. Francois doesn't believe it at first, but finally agrees to it when Maitre mentions that payment is involved. Christine visits Francois at his home to inquire about the picture, but finds Elena there posting as his girlfriend. She leaves Francois's home and meets up with a private investigator she hired. She mentions what she had witnessed and expresses her doubt about the entire situation. She also asks him to keep an eye on Elena morning and night. Maitri helps Elena ditch the investigator and directs her to a private estate where she finds Lavasseur, who tries to make out with her. She, however, refuses, saying she couldn't be with two men simultaneously. She further goes on to explain that she'd been trying her best to make it look like she was a real couple with Francois. She leaves the estate and then visits Francois at his job, where she kisses him and makes sure it all gets captured on camera by one of Levasseur's men. They then decide to have lunch together. Emily decides to go on a date with Pascal, a cell phone vendor who had been asking her out for ages. They coincidentally decide to eat at the same restaurant Francois and Elena were at. Emily and Francois both try to outdo each other by acting extra cozy with their respective dates. Francois returns home to discover someone watching him from the abandoned apartment opposite his. He mentions this to Elena, who says that it's probably the paparazzi who wanted to know if they were a real couple or not. She suggests they close the curtain, to which Francois replies that he doesn't have a curtain. Elena then mentions that they'd simply have to act like a real couple all night long. To make the charade believable, they decide to share a bed. In his sleep, Francois fondles Elena's breast and mentions Emily's name. The paparazzi sees this and immediately takes pictures, which he sends to Maitri, who forwards them to Lavasseur. Christine gets a call from her private investigator, who mentions that Francois and Elena are not a real couple. He also mentions that Lavasseur has the fake couple under constant surveillance. This gets Christine excited as she realizes that Lavasseur was getting anxious about his plan. The investigator also mentions that Francois' apartment lacks curtains, to which she replies, "Then wouldn't curtains add to his anxiety? When you can't see, your imagination runs wild." The next day, while Francois attends one of Elena's fashion shows, some of Christine's men break into Francois' apartment to install curtains. Meanwhile, Christine herself attends Elena's fashion show. After the show, she walks up to the fake couple and then mentions that their act was entertaining to her. She also asks them to keep it up. Meanwhile, Lavasseur decides to call off the deal with Elena and remain with his wife. However, this decision doesn't last long, as he blows his top after getting a call that Francois' place has new curtains. In his rage, he has Maitri call Francois to inquire about the new curtains. Francois, who is oblivious to Christine's work, mentions that the curtains were gotten by Elena to protect their privacy. This enrages Lavasseur, who snatches the phone from Maitri and rains insults on Francois. He calls him a thief and an asshole. Elena decides to do Francois a favor and pays Emily a visit, where she explains the entire facade to her. She then hands over the money Francois had received from Lavasseur as payment to Emily, since she was the reason Francois accepted the deal in the first place. Shocked by the revelation, Emily visits Francois at his job and makes up with him. She also kisses him before leaving. Meanwhile, Christine visits Lavasseur at their jointly owned company, where she tells Lavasseur that she has curtains put up in Francois' apartment. She further mentions that his lies about the photo were such fun and that she found this bumbling hilarious. Lavasseur tries to wiggle his way out by feigning ignorance, at which point Christine replies, "If you love that girl, leave me and go off to Venice with her. I'll file for the divorce." Realizing the gravity of the situation, Lavasseur replies that he never planned to divorce her and that he'd rather go to Venice with his wife, Christine, for a second honeymoon. He also mentions that Elena means nothing to him and that the only one he loves is Christine. Later that day, Christine hands over a device she had used to record her entire conversation with her husband to her investigator. Meanwhile, Francois visits his parents with both Elena and Emily, where he announces his and Emily's marriage. On their way home, Elena gets a call from Lavasseur, who mentions that it is time to end their facade. He also mentions that he had filed for divorce and was ready to go on a trip to Venice with her. Elated by the news, Elena decides to return to her home, where she finds a mail containing the recording Christine had given to her investigator. The next day, Lavasseur waits for Elena at their rendezvous point, but instead meets Francois, who passes on a message from Elena saying their relationship was over. That's gonna wrap up this recap. We hope you've enjoyed it. If so, please click the subscribe button with notifications turned on so you don't miss a single video.